I will send you all of that. I'll send that to you. Okay. Now let's see if we see this. Do we see my presentation there, folks?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. So for those of you who have joined just a tiny bit late, I'm sorry that we just kind of gave a synopsis of what I was going to cover. My name is Laura McDermott, and we're going to cover pretty much everything. And then if you want to type into the chat what you would specifically be interested in, I'll try to make sure we do it. But it seems like there's the expected wide array of crops. So that's wonderful. That's what this was supposed to be for. All right, so this is me, and this presentation, like my Master Gardener training, but I've taken a lot of the other stuff out, so we're just going to be focusing on pruning, is based on this guide, which is now available online for free, the Cornell Guide to Growing Fruit at Home. And so it gives a lot more information about home fruit culture than just pruning. So for those of you who have never been involved with the Master Gardener program and would like to have access to a really great, only very slightly dated publication, I would encourage you to look at this, because I do think it's still one of the very best out there. So, and this is how you can reach me. I try very hard to just answer commercial orchardists questions, but if some of you are you're starting into production, please don't hesitate to email me or give me a call. Otherwise, I ask folks to kind of go through your local extension person, and I know that there may not be always a local person, but this is how you can get a hold of me. And in the middle of the season, it's tricky, but I will do my very best to get back to you. At this particular thing, I'm doing a little spotted wing Drosophila fruit analysis, and we'll talk very briefly about that because that's a pretty tricky pest. So there's a lot of reasons to grow fruit at home. They're beautiful, they're challenging for the adventurous gardener, they're delicious, they're nutritious. There's just a lot of reasons. They can really add some three-dimensional aesthetic value to your garden. And yeah, very varied. But one of the things that we get questions about, especially from homeowners all the time, is why won't my plants set fruit? And there's a bunch of different reasons. And we're really only going to talk a little bit, but I'll try to kind of refer some things. But the age of the plant, the juvenile period of plants, most of these perennial plants do need to go through a juvenile period, which can vary anything from 1 to maybe 7, or if you're on a standard tree, it could be as long as 20 years for a juvenile period, which is why we put a lot of things on semi-dwarf and dwarfing rootstocks. But that's one reason, that they're just too young. A second reason might be that they had winter injury. We had a couple of instances this winter that might lead to some winter injury. Late spring frost, of course, is a big problem. And then problems with pollination, which could be poor weather for pollinators, inadequate pollination, either because there's not cross-pollination when it's needed or just lack of pollinators in the area. We'll talk briefly about that. Then obviously poor plant nutrition or management, and pruning comes into this thing, and that's what we're really going to drill down on today. And then disease management, which we won't really talk about, except in the fact that pruning really does help you with disease management. So it's very, very important. And then again, if you are pre-plant, which is a great time to be thinking about all of this, is just really important when you put perennial plants or semi-perennial, like strawberries might be, that you really think about where you're putting them, how much space you're leaving them, how much sun, etc. So understanding what you're getting into before you stick 15 or 20 fruit trees in your yard is important to do. But we all get excited, I know that. So some of you might be in that kind of the 2 or 3 year after the fact and like, oh my gosh, what have they done? So one of the biggest things is understanding essential tools, and loppers, pruning saws, with bypass motion. The loppers and the shears should have a bypass motion, meaning that they are scissors. They're not an anvil. An anvil motion is where you would use on herbaceous plants, some of your perennials, where it has a cutting blade and then it kind of hits the other edge. That's not appropriate for woody plants. You really need to have a bypass motion. Your pruning shears often will have cutting teeth on both sides, so that to save your energy, you're not just cutting on the draw, you're cutting on push and draw. And same with your pruning, the pull extension. Sometimes this will have a little saw on it, or sometimes it'll have a lopper blade that you can kind of use with a pulley. But I do want to introduce you to some much better things that could help your pruning tremendously. And this Felco, it's a battery charged pruner. It has an extension pole. There are cheaper brands out there than Felco, but I am telling you, you will prune better and you will be happier about pruning if you get something like this. These Felco ones are very expensive. They range between $1,600 and $2,000, so they are an investment. You can get much, much less expensive versions like at a Lowe's or a Home Depot that still will do it. The part of the difference is the blade quality and also the battery life. But so a lot of the Felco ones will prune for 8 hours. Most of us don't want to prune that long. But I really encourage you to go look at that. Your landscape, your perennial plants, your woody plants will be so much happier with you getting a tool like this. The other thing that can be very handy, and even if you have access to something like a battery powered pruner, are these cable saws. And they're usually in, they used to be offered in the forestry, the forestry publications or forestry equipment catalogs. And now I had a really hard time finding this just recently. But if you just Google cable saw, and sometimes a pipe cable saw it'll be listed at, it'll still do wood. It's often sold maybe at camping catalogs, but these are not very expensive, probably $10 or $12. And the blade won't last forever, but it really allows you to get into those really tricky multi-stem shrubs, those little tiny areas, and will help you take care of them a little bit easier. So those two things I think will make a big difference from an equipment standpoint. Okay, so we're going to talk about tree fruits first. New York has a lot of tree fruits in its history. Pome fruits are apples and pears, and stone fruits are cherries, peaches, plums, nectarines, and apricots. And pome fruits are mostly Malus and Pyrus, and Prunus, Pyrus is a pear. Sorry, Prunus are all of the stone fruits. The very big difference is the type of, obviously they have a stone in a stone fruit, but also the way their buds are formed on the tree. A pome fruit has what we call spur growth, and they're very short internodes, very compact, gnarly little growth that will grow on top of older wood. Now, each little bit of wood is not very old, but they have such tiny little internodes that you don't even notice it, and they look really old. And that spur is itself actually quite old. Whereas a stone fruit grows on 1-year-old wood, so you'll be setting the wood for the next year's crop primarily on a lot of 1-year-old wood. So that's important distinction to know. For both of them, even though these are pictures of mostly apples, for both of them, I would encourage you to plant 2 cultivars. Not a lot of the stone fruits are actually self-fruitful, like peaches will actually pollinate themselves, but just in case they are a little bit more prone to not doing as well from a self-fruitful standpoint, having 2 different varieties of apples, 2 different varieties of pears, 2 different varieties of peaches will really help kind of check that possible problem off of your list. If you have crab apples in your yard, that will often be a great pollinator. If there's a lot of wild apples right around your property, perfect. You've got that covered. But that's a big kind of thing to just keep your eye on, is the fact that some varieties are less self-fruitful than others. The next thing that kind of does impact how rapid our trees will go through this juvenile period is the rootstock. And so we are no longer growing Johnny Appleseed types of plants where we're scattering apple seeds across the landscape and they're growing up into these great big gorgeous 40, 50-year-old standard trees that we used to see on our landscape a lot. We are mostly in the commercial enterprise, and for most homeowners, we're trying to grow a smaller tree. It's a lot easier to manage. It's safer. And the other great thing is that it's often initially in the young time, it's fairly winter hardy, but it's also more precocious. So in the second, third, fourth year, for most dwarf and semi-dwarf rootstock, the scions, the cultivar that's on the top of the rootstock, will actually fruit much earlier. So that's a reason to grow a dwarf or semi-dwarf plant. And the other thing is that they do, obviously, just in the name, have an impact on how big the mature tree will be. And so our dwarf plants are grown on a rootstock called M9. It's the dwarfing rootstock. It really does keep a tree about 8, maybe 10 feet high if you get really very, very nutritious and rich soils. And then a semi-dwarf rootstock can be any number of variation. Could be an M26, could be an M7, M106, M111, which range from about 12 to 24 feet. So there's a big difference there, right? So you might want to, if you're purchasing a semi-dwarf tree, you might want to try to find out from, if you're buying them mail order through a nursery, you might want to ask the nursery what that rootstock is. If you go to a box store or a local nursery center and you're buying trees, ask them, like, what is the actual semi-dwarf rootstock? But I'd encourage you to look online at some of the great nurseries that are out there, because they do have a lot more, they're the ones that are growing those plants. So I think that if you're buying, especially if you're buying, rootstocks that are going to be just not potted, but they're bare root, that probably would be a great way to go, is to buy directly from the nurseries. The other thing that affects the size of your tree is just how rich the soil is and how well you take care of the plant. So that'll also help. And then there are other rootstocks. Some of our stone fruit are actually grafted, so there's not a lot of differences. Peaches, it's almost 100% on level. Plums and prunes are usually on one of these two. Pears is a cross between Old Home and Farmingdale varieties, and that's what you get, period. 1 or 2 year old nursery stock, usually dwarf, you plant them, and immediately we're going to start talking about training, because you would put a dwarf stock, especially, you would give it some kind of support, because the other thing about these dwarfing plants is that they are fairly shallow rooted. And by having some kind of support system, a stake in the ground, it'll help them get rooted initially. And I would leave that stake there for several years. And most new new plantings that are going in will have a permanent stake or trellis system for these dwarfing plants, because they just don't send down really deep roots. They're small, right? Okay, do I have any questions about the initial first stage of, the tree's life? I think I'm okay. No chat, nothing in the chat. Okay, so we'll keep going. So after you plant this, a great way to start is to head back that, we call it a whip. So the tree could be 5 feet tall, but you want to head it back. You want to cut off that about the 3 to 3.5 feet, depending upon where you might want the height of your first laterals to come out. Remember that trees don't grow from the ground up. They're growing right from that apical meristem. So if they shoot out, let me see if I can get a pointer going here. Yeah, if they shoot out right under here, they shoot out some of your laterals. Those laterals are going to be at that height forever until you take them off. They're not going to grow from here up, right? And so that's an important thing to think about when you first are starting to train your trees, because if you put if you leave branches down at 2.5 feet or so, they're going to be there when you're trying to mow or when you're trying to mulch, and they could be a real pain. So just trying to start your laterals at a reasonable height. And then this picture shows these little safety or clothespins, and all those things are doing is trying to push down that really green, supple growth so that grows horizontally. And that's our goal. Horizontal growth, is stronger because it has a better angle at attachment. So it's not weak. It's closer to a 90-degree angle. So if you get an ice storm or if you get heavy crop weight, that branch will be less likely to snap. So really training it out to as close to a 90-degree angle as possible is good. And the other thing about lateral growth, 90-degree angle growth, is that it's slower. And so we want the plant to grow, but we don't want it to grow too fast. And if you think about trees in the landscape that have really upright growth, they are often very fast growing trees. Think cottonwoods and some of the Norway maples. They have very acute branching angles. They're not they're not as what we call are aesthetically pleasing. So some of the slower growing plants that maybe like a dogwood, that is a very prized plant because it has these gorgeous right angle branching attachments. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to slow the tree growth down. And with mallows, especially with an apple tree, it's really hard to grow it down. They like to grow. They send out lots of shoots and stuff. So we're going to use three main types of cuts. We're going to have that heading back cut, which takes off the apical meristem, and what is there in the apical meristem, apical buds of all plants, is a hormone called auxin, and auxin prevents lateral bud break. So once you remove that auxin, you get a lot of lateral bud break. Think pinching coleus, and that's what happens. So here we go. You're heading back, you're going to get a lot of lateral bud break. And then you could do from really a pinching and a thinning cut is the same thing, but pinching is just with a vegetative tissue. It's the green supple tissue, and you can pinch that out. And then when it's becomes woody, a thinning cut comes all the way back to its point of attachment, which oddly enough, even though you're removing that auxin from way up here, it doesn't have the same kind of effect. And that is a good thing. I think somebody's phone might have rung. Just keep an eye on your try to keep yourself muted. I'm not very startly, but you never know. All right, so that's a thinning back cut versus a heading back cut, which does have an impact on how growth is pushed out of the plant afterwards. So some of the basics. When you prune an apple tree, we're going to be doing it in the dormant period, which is usually February to April. You could do it earlier if you just had a lot of plants, and you'll probably see commercial orchardists out there much earlier. Really, you can prune them as soon as the plant goes into full dormancy. And there is something that we don't usually talk too much about, but they have to gain chilling, and they're gaining chilling hours throughout the early fall and then the late spring. And once they have gotten all their chilling, then they will actually break dormancy if they have the right amount of sun and the temperatures. So we don't want to do heavy pruning when the plant looks like this. It's all leafed out. We want to train these plants in the spring and the summer. And that's all to encourage productive fruiting wood and horizontal branches. And I'm not going to spend any time in that little diagram. But mainly we want to maximize light interception. And this is for all fruit. Better quality fruit is going to happen if you have sun. And by full sun, I mean 8 to 12 hours of sun. So if you've got some plants that are shaded for 3 or 4 hours by a large tree, just because of the way it's positioned, your quality of fruit, especially tree fruit, is not going to be so terrific. It's going to be a little harder. And if you're growing blueberries or even raspberries in that situation, that might not be so bad. But tree fruit especially, we really like to have sun. And a lot of this work was done at Cornell. When some of the transition, there are a whole bunch of different reasons that went into why tree fruit went from these giant, big old standard trees to much smaller trees. And one of the things was the light interception, because in a large tree, a third of your fruiting area, the fruiting canopy, is actually almost zero sunlight. So quality is really impacted. And even in the mid canopy, it's impacted somewhat. And it's not till you get to the outside third of this large tree that you've actually got good quality fruit. But so by making the tree smaller, changing the pruning types, it actually improves how much sun exposure and light exposure they get. And that's why we're down to like a really small tree, 8 feet or so, because there's only 1.6% of that tree that is in a shaded or compromised situation. And you can put a lot more trees into that acre and therefore grow higher quality. The percentage of fruit that's harvested is higher quality. So, and there's also, it's a lot easier to harvest. You don't have to get on ladders. You get precocious bearing because it's a small tree and it's going to be bearing earlier. It's a lot easier to cover with pesticides. And so you might actually have better pest control with these small trees. So fewer sprays. So there's a whole bunch of different things. We don't all have to train to these central leader type pyramidal shapes, although that's what we're going to mostly cover here. But you can do a lot with making really artistic espaliers and train to a trellis, a Y trellis or a T trellis. There's all different ways to prune trees. And some of them are absolutely beautiful, right? These little espaliers, this fan espalier, it becomes 2-dimensional instead of 3-dimensional. It does require a fair amount of attention during the growing season. It's a little bit like a field-sized bonsai, but you're out there constantly pruning and removing extra shoots, moving the vigor into the fruiting buds. Look at all the fruit right along here. I mean, you can't say that that's not productive. There's a lot of fruit there, a lot of fruit here. So these things are available. I'm not going to talk about how to do this. It is not difficult. It just requires commitment. And you can get some great videos online. If you Google espalier, there's some great books about it. And it certainly does have an impact in a garden. Okay, so let me just check the chat. It looks good. I hope I'm still got everybody hanging in there. So we're going to promote a single central trunk in the central leader. It's pretty self-descriptive, right? We want evenly spaced main branches, those lateral branches, and we want this to spread those main branches from the point of attachment out as horizontal as possible. So we start young in the first leaf. We plant them, and then using these clothespins, we try not to have branches stacked one on another. If you take the bird's eye view, you're going to have them all spread out. If you're looking down on the plant, so this is what this is talking about, trying to remove things that are stacked too closely on one another. And then after you get them just right, you're going to take some spreaders. You can use your own homemade spreaders, little 1x1s, just kind of jammed in there. You can hang bricks on these plants. You can do a whole bunch of different things to you can staple them. Remember that picture we saw earlier where the strings were attached to pull those branches down. And you have to do this for a few years. You're going to be managing this tree for a few years to try to get that right structure in place. And then you can kind of back off a little bit, because that juvenile period is when you got a lot of vegetative growth in the main architecture of the plant. And then after about 5 years, it kind of settles down. And then you're going to be doing some kind of maintenance pruning. So planting year, this is what it looks like. You're going to head it back. Remember from that diagram, remove some of the side shoots, choose your leader, pinch the competition, use your little clothespins to spread out those scaffolds and stake it. This is what I prefer rather than that picture of the bamboo stake. I love these electrical conduit, not expensive, last forever. And yeah, just a very good way to start. Then the year after planting, you're going to remove anything that's too much. Try to give it a little bit more room and then do a little bit of spreading out. I personally would allow your laterals to start up another layer or so because I just think they're too close to the ground. And then you'll be able to get, it'll be a little bit easier to pick and manage around that. Second year, same deal. Love this picture right here because this is what a 2-year-old plant after you planted it should look like. Just well spread, nice. They're not too much wood. So once they get bearing, and after the second or third leaf is when we should start to see some fruit be able to be harvested. You might want to rub out all of those buds the very first year to help that plant put its energy into establishing a root system. But then you can start to think about leaving maybe the second year. I might also take off some of the flower buds or most of them. But then you can start letting out the third, fourth, fifth year for sure. But once they're bearing, you're going to want to remove diseased, broken, or dead tissue and trying to bring it back to the point of attachment. You want to avoid doing a lot of small cuts because remember, when you take off a bunch of little things, you're actually invigorating the tree more. So thinning cuts is what to focus on. And you want to remove any side branches that are greater than half the diameter of the branch. So say you've got a side branch coming and then right out of the top of it, you've got a water sucker or a water sprout. It's like almost bigger than the branch it's coming from. That needs to go. And anything that's even approaching too big coming out of those lateral branches, that scaffold that you're trying to establish, you need to get rid of them. Remove suckers. Suckers are down from the crown and often are coming out of the rootstocks. They definitely need to go. And water sprouts are usually coming off of a main scaffold branch. Here is a weak and narrow angle branch. It's also drooping. You want to get rid of that. This is what I was talking about, the spur growth, that tiny little growth. And hopefully I've got a real actual photograph. This one, see this guy coming out here, this one? They're going to start competing with your central leader. So they probably should be removed. Avoid pruning too much. Like if you've got a older tree and you're trying to take it down, if you just come in and top it, you're going to end up having things look like this. And they're just really too small. You've got a lot of upright growth. It's not going to be productive. It's not going to be fruitful. So just try not to do that kind of cut. Okay, that's it for my apple and pear. Pears very infrequently. Like once you get that kind of established, you just go in and take a few cuts because pears are, first of all, they're very upright growing. They don't like to grow laterally. So don't kill yourself trying to make a pear grow 90 degrees. But they tend to get a little bit slower growing, so you can actually slow down on them a bit. And they also are, it's really important to do that when they're dormant because they get fire blight. Actually, fire blight is really a problem lately. So pruning early in the season is very helpful. Now pruning peaches, so apples have to be pruned annually. There's just no way about it. They love to prune, and pruning peaches or some of the other stone fruits, but peaches especially, annual pruning is very important, and pruning really hard. Unlike the apples and pears, you want to prune these when they're flowering. Partially, not always, but partially because we have such a problem with winter injury in stone fruits that when you're flowering, you'll be able to tell unfruitful wood, you'll be able to tell dead wood, and it'll be a little bit easier to get it out of there. Peaches are, because they don't have spur growth, they grow on 1-year-old wood. So you have to get rid of the old wood because that's just taking up room, right? So peaches will grow in kind of this vase-like bowl type setup. And you're going to be wanting to take a lot of these out. You still need that structure. So the basic wood is going to stay, but a lot of this exterior wood, this 1-year-old wood or 3-year-old wood or 2-year-old wood can go. And so you're saving 1-year-old wood. So this is a good picture. It's been pruned nicely so that you get tons of flowering, but this was probably double the amount of wood on there. And so it was taken out. Cherries and plums also prune when flowering. If you do some good annual training, they are not as aggressive growers, so you won't have as much wood to take out, but you still want to move them out. They also, even though they will primarily bloom on 1-year-old wood, they actually will also fruit on some 2- and 3-year-old wood as well. So they fruit a lot to the point where maybe they're oversetting sometimes, but we don't have a problem with that because we have birds that will help us harvest them and thin them. The other thing about thinning is you want to thin these fruit when the fruit gets to be about the size of a nickel, between a nickel and a quarter. And you do some hand thinning. This helps to optimize fruit quality. It keeps the plant architecturally balanced so you don't have all this huge fruit load on branches that can't support it. And it also keeps the tree in what we call perennial bearing. So apples, especially, sometimes pears, go into this alternate year bearing. Well, they'll bear heavy 1 year, flower and bear heavy 1 year, and then the next year is hardly anything. So by thinning them at that appropriate time between the nickel and the quarter size, it kind of helps keep that plant in balance. And I usually just walk my hand. That's a great picture. Just walking your pinky and your thumb 4 to 6 inches apart. You can do this for peaches and plums and thin them off so that there's only one fruitlet within a cluster. This really helps keep the tree in balance. And it is, I mean, obviously commercial growers do not do hand thinning because it's just way too laborious. So they are using some chemical plant hormone sprays that will help them drop fruit. It's an extremely, if you know any orchardists, don't talk to them in like mid to late May. It's a very stressful time of their lives. And I just leave them alone until like the 4th of July or mid-June. It's just really a challenging time for a fruit grower. Okay, let me just make sure. I'm going to open the chat so I can see what's going on in the chat. Anybody got any questions about tree fruit pruning? No. Okay. All right, let's talk about grapes. And it seems like there wasn't many grape growers, even though I added some grape pictures. So we'll cover this relatively quickly. Grapes are really, I mean, a lot of people, we have a lot of grapes grown in New York. We can grow a wide variety of grapes. The vinifera is primarily the very valued, like Cabernet and Chardonnay. These are less hardy. They're zone 7A, but then we can grow in some areas of New York, we can grow northern vinifera, which are like Gewürztraminer and Riesling. And then we can grow really hardy vinifera in zone 6A. And some of these hybrids that are now coming out, hardy American hybrids, all of these, they can be grown right up into even a zone 4. Some of the newer Minnesota releases those varieties, and they make decent wines. They're great table grapes. So there's a lot of opportunity for growing different grapes. There's seedless table grapes that can be grown. So I would encourage you, if you want to grow a fruit that's, it's relatively easy to grow, I would encourage you to grow grapes. And mainly we get these grapes when they're, we propagate a grapevine from you can put a piece of grapevine in the ground. You can also try to root some pieces of that. Right about now is when that would be done. Those cuttings can be taken. You can put a little oxen on the basal end and just root it in some potting mix in your house and then plant them out when it's just a little bit warmer, 8 foot on center. Did somebody have a question?
Yeah, there's a good question there for wind chills. Can you see it? Do these temperatures include wind chill temp or only air temp?
That is only air temp. Those are so what those are based on, those hardiness zones are based on the minimum winter temperature that we get in the winter. And that does, that is a problem. And that's why some people, when they're growing some of these hardier or these less hardy grape varieties, I have some growers that bought a snow machine so they can actually blow snow up around some of their vines to try to shelter them. Some people actually take them off of the trellis and try to kind of shield them somewhat. They'll wrap them. There's a lot of hijinks that people will do to try to protect those plants. They'll bury them like you would a standard rose. Those are some of the strategies to help prevent wind chill damage. But the most thing, usually when we're talking about hardiness, it's the whole tree hardiness. There's a lot of difference between fruit bud hardiness and foliar leaf bud hardiness. Almost 6, 7, some situations 10 degrees hardiness. So that's why you could have a peach that you can grow for years and never have a single flower bud on it, because it's just those flower buds are just getting frozen during the winter. Frustrating. Anyway, this is, you just keep kind of removing all the other shoots. You're going to try to bring the cane, the first shoot to a trellis, tie it to the trellis, and then remove the flower clusters and the side shoots for the rest of the season once you've got it up there to try to promote growth. And then there's just a little bit of fertilizer that it needs. We're not really talking about that, but pruning and training tips. So basically, don't let your vines become overgrown. They have to be really aggressively pruned every single year. 90% of the new growth has to come off. Again, the buds are on 1-year-old wood, so that's what's going to bear the fruit. This is one, and I put some links in these things so that people can. Are you guys seeing the little, is it recording? Oh yeah, it is recording, shoot. So there are these links which are active, and if maybe we can even send you the PowerPoint if you want that. But these are some great videos, all from different university systems that talks about how to actually do the pruning. And I'll be honest with you, a Zoom is a convenient but sorry replacement for actually doing a pruning demonstration, because it's very difficult to conceptualize this 3-dimensional activity. But I appreciate you not making me drive through the snow to Middlefield today, so thank you for that. But anyway, that's why the videos might be very helpful. So we're going to, a 4-arm Niffin is a kind of a traditional system. It has 4 different laterals, maybe 6 to 8 buds along that lateral, and that's what you're trying to get back to every single season. You have some renewal spurs in case you get winter injury, but there's about 6 to 10 fruiting buds along here, and then that plant will continue to grow. So obviously most of your fruit is going to be right here in the center. You don't want those late fruit because they're never going to get ripe, right? They're not going to be the quality you want. So you can remove fruit buds and flowers that are further along the trunk after you've got your initial crop established. And I won't go into too much detail about these 4-arm Niffins, but these are a little bit different. They allow what we call a partially umbrella system that's happening. And the reason for this is that you could go absolutely start craving mad trying to manage some of our grapes in our climate. The 4-arm Niffin was developed for a much poorer soil, drier, less water, and so just basically less vigorous plant. And that's why these umbrella systems have been developed by the growers in New York State. And this is a Hudson River umbrella. Here's a modified system. I got this, ironically enough, these really great diagrams off of a Michigan State fact sheet, but these were developed in New York State. And these systems might help you manage a grapevine a little bit better rather than literally killing yourself by like weekly pruning all through the season. And there's also a great YouTube video on how to do this. Some people like to just have a little bit of fruit under an arbor, but you still have to prune this annually, or you don't get the amount of fruiting canes and spurs, because again, you've got an old bunch of vines, right? Once they get 3 years old, there are hardly any flower buds on that wood. So you got to thin it out. You've got to get some light into the canopy so that you can actually have some flower buds that will bear fruit. This is another common problem. It's pruning neglected vines. So basically, remember, grapes are super resilient. They're one of the few native plants that we really value and work with. So you do need to cut them back, remove all but a few canes and a few clusters, select that vigorous cane and train it to a trellis as best you can. And then eventually you're going to remove the old trunk. And there you have a very nice. Okay, this is an excellent, Paul, fabulous question. When I say fruit buds that are on 1-year-old wood, I mean they have gone through a winter chilling. So you get the fruit growth, or the twig growth, the vine growth, whatever, that comes out of the bud in the spring. It sets these invisible buds in the fall as our light gets shorter. It comes through a mandatory chilling. It has to have the chilling, mandatory chilling period. And then it will actually flower and fruit that second year. So it's not new wood, it's 1-year-old wood. So that's the terminology. New wood is this season's wood. 1-year-old wood has gone through a full cycle. Okay, thank you for asking that, because that's a super important differentiation.
When I'm looking at it, do you?
Does anybody have a question? I hear somebody talking. Okay. All right. I think that might be it on our grape things. So let's just quickly go through strawberries, because I don't want to take too much time. There's several different types of strawberries: June bearing, day neutral, ever bearing. When June bearing is what we mostly think of in this neck of the woods, because in the Northeast we have these Matagro plants that we really have this kind of tradition around growing June bearing fruit. But remember that when we say June bearing, it's the short day in September or so that actually triggers bud set. So they're actually called short day plants in the parlance, and day neutral set buds all through the year. It doesn't matter. They're more triggered by weather, and ever bearing are also, those are more like the alpine plants. So the one thing that's kind of a renewal type of thing that a lot of people don't know about strawberries, that they do need to be renovated. And so after your June bearing plant finishes setting fruit, and you've picked it, you've harvested it, so it's probably mid to late July, get in there, mow them off. You can just use a regular old rotary mower. Then if you possibly can take a little tiller, a little mantis tiller or something, and narrow up those rows to about a foot, and then rake some of that soil up over the crown. Because the thing about a strawberry, it's actually growing up and out of the dirt, and that crown becomes quite vulnerable to winter temperatures. So renovation is super important. So that's all I was going to say on strawberry. And I hope maybe at the end we can answer the strawberry questions. So let's talk about brambles, because I know a lot of people had raspberry and blackberry questions. So these plants are very closely related, as they are to a number of different dewberries. And now I'm having a brain cramp, but there's a lot of like wild raspberries that are out there, or caneberries, I should call. They're all in the genus Rubus. But they aren't, blackberries and raspberries are different in that a blackberry keeps the core of that berry inside the plant. It's not hollow, but a raspberry is hollow. And that's why there are black raspberries, yellow raspberries, purple raspberries, but they are not blackberries. Blackberries, oddly enough, even though they're an incredibly vigorous plant, they are somewhat winter sensitive. And I'm a little nervous that if you're growing blackberries this season, you may not have much crop, because we had that nice warm temperature through December, and then bam, at Christmas, we had that terrible cold front come through for about a day and a half, where we had that miserable cold temperature. And that, I'm afraid, may have done in some of our buds on blackberries. So have to keep an eye on that. I'm mostly black or red raspberries are pretty darn sturdy, pretty hardy. Black raspberries the same. Yellow raspberries are less. They're just not as aggressive a plant. They're not as vigorous. Their bud sensitivity is a little greater to cold, so they may have, and purple the same. Purple and yellow are a little bit less vigorous. So black or raspberries, let's talk quickly about raspberries. And most of us are growing blackberries that are also summer fruiting. Even though they're not growing, they're fruiting in the summer, they're what we call summer fruiting or summer bearing blackberries and raspberries, because they have to go, they're born on this cane comes up in the spring, goes all the way through the summer, and it has to go through a chilling period in order for its fruit to actually, the fruit is set here, but the fruit buds, I say, the invisible fruit buds are laid down, and then they come through the summer, and then you get blossoming and fruiting in the summer, or in the case of a blackberry, it's late summer. So you're probably not picking most of the hardy blackberry varieties until like late August or so. And you really want to try to keep them on the plant as long as you can, because that's how they sweeten up. So that is a summer fruiting, summer bearing, or floricane plant. Red, yellow, black, purple. They're all in that, plus blackberries. And this is the cane type of blackberry. We don't grow very many of the vining type of blackberry because they are not as hardy. So raspberries that are what we call primocane or fall fruiting or even everbearing do not need any chilling. So it'll come up, it'll go through the summer, and without any chilling in the fall, you'll have blossoming and fruiting, and then you can handle them a little bit. And we have red and yellow varieties of this, okay? So does anybody have any question about that? Because it's really important to know what kind of raspberry or caneberry you're growing, because that informs how you prune them. We'll leave a little space for some questions because this is a tricky one. To complicate things, we have some floricane varieties that actually will set fruit. They'll have like two different, so once they go through that initial fall bearing, it usually takes them one full year, but they'll actually fruit a little bit in the summer, and then they'll fruit a little bit in the fall. Conversely, we have some primocane berries that if you don't prune them all the way, they will fruit on the old primocane as though it was a floricane, and then these new ones will come up and trick you into thinking that they're fruiting on the same plant, but usually they're not. And so they seem more everbearing. It makes it very complicated. Let me just check the chat. Is there a way to identify them if you do not plant them yourself? So what I tell people is if you've inherited a patch and you don't know what you're dealing with, mow them off in the fall, let them all come up and see what they do the following fall. That's how I would take care of it. And then, if they fruit that first fall after they come up, they're predominantly fall fruiting or primocane berries. Okay. So trellising the summer bearing floricane fruiting ones, which helps reduce winter cane breakage. It keeps berries off the ground, makes harvesting a little easier. what I would try to do is try to build yourself a little structure. These are just like those green snow fence posts, pretty easy. Drive them in a couple feet, maybe a foot or so into the ground. You can use twine or wire, depending. You want to have about, they're at a V. So at the top of that V, it's going to be about 3.5 inches. They're about 6 feet up out of the ground. The top wire is at about 4, the bottom wire is at 2. And you've got this is going to be angled a bit, but that's your support post that kind of keeps some of the pressure off some of these V posts. So you let those first canes come up, you tie them to the wire, and then during the summer, the following year, you're going to pick from these. Okay, so these canes actually grew last season. This is what's going to be harvested, and during this summer, you're going to have these new canes coming up. Okay, that's how I would recommend that you try to use trellis a summer bearing or floricane fruiting plant. In the early spring, you're going to prune and trellis. You're going to thin them out. This is super important, thinning them out. When you have the black raspberries or the purple raspberries, or even if you had some of the black berries that vined, which probably, unless you're from like southern Pennsylvania, you're probably not growing them. But you would let them come up, and the big thing you're going to have to do is top them so that you get branching. And I think I've got a better picture here. Yes. So summer bearing red or yellow raspberries, you want to prune them to 3 to 4 canes per linear foot of row. And remember that your row is only about 12 inches wide. You prune them from the base, get rid of all the old ones, get rid of all the broken ones, get rid of any of the ones that don't look very thick. Like I'd be looking for the size of a Sharpie or more. Prune them all out, and then you get this kind of beautiful thing. And be doing that now, as soon as the snow melts. And there's a good video on this, so there's a link to that. And then for summer bearing black and purple raspberries and the vining type of blackberry, you want to tip them. You're going to plant them early. You're going to tip them at about 2 feet so that you encourage this branched lateral growth. And then the following season, after that first tipping, you're going to have all this branch growth, a lot of big growth. You're going to thin them back to 2 to 3 canes per hill. Do that first, and then tip everything back so that you don't have all that big vining. And so those plants, see, that's the difference. This is the crazy part of this. So remember how I told you had to have the buds, they were laid down, and they're not going to bear on that wood unless it goes through chilling. Because you have this part of the plant that's growing through the chilling, even in the later summer, if you get flowers and fruit, you'll still have fruiting area out here. That's the kooky part of this, but it senses that. Okay. And then if you're pruning a fall bearing plant, you could use this trellis where you're removing it. You've got a T trellis and it's stuck into a buried plastic pipe. I have never really seen the advantage of doing a trellis for a fall bearing or primocane fruiting plant myself, but I always show that. Oops. And the other thing that you can do is just then after you've fruited like something like Heritage or Autumn Britain, and you're looking at maybe right after Thanksgiving, you want to do something to get out of the house, you want to go mow those raspberries off. That's great. Or you can wait till this time of the year. Fall is probably better because it's not so wet and you're not battling the snow, but you can bring them right down as close as you possibly can to the ground. And when I say it's close, if you leave that little bit of stub, like a 6-inch stub, can be problematic, because remember what I said about this feels the chilling. You're going to have a new thing that comes up, and sometimes some of those buds, if you don't get them down close enough, it'll actually set fruit, and you'll have early, really low, poor quality fruit. So it's really important to get them as close to the ground as you can. Okay, hold on. What am I doing? Okay, I just wanted to introduce Spotted-winged Drosophila. It's an invasive fruit fly that has been really creating problems, especially with caneberries. So if you've seen this little critter in some of your berries, don't despair. Everyone has. It is everywhere. And there's a lot of things you can do. Monitor for it. You can spray for it. There are some biological organic sprays. You can also consider using exclusion netting. This isn't a pest management talk, but it's a real challenge for soft fruit production in our state. So before I move to blueberries, I just want to check our time. So we're about an hour. Does anybody have any more questions? I know that's super fast and I don't want to leave anybody with like, uh-oh, I don't really understand that. So please go ahead and ask a question. Okay, I think we're good then. There's going to be plenty. If you think of anything, there'll be plenty of time at the end. So blueberries. So interestingly enough, we had the rosaceous plants. We just covered all of them. Everything that we talked about so far are in the rosaceous family, which is something to be aware of. And I'll digress slightly into a soil-borne disease thing. All of those plants, that would be Pyrus, Malus, Prunus, oh my gosh, can you believe it? I can't. Frigeria, it's a strawberry. Anyway, rubus, all of those share a susceptibility to some of the soil-borne diseases like verticillium, like Phytophthora, like Rhizoctonia and Fusarium. This plant is in the ericaceous family, blueberries, and not at all related to all of those, that which has some, you know, bearing on being able to follow a strawberry planting behind a raspberry planting, because if you've got soil-borne disease, that could be problematic. The reason you would not be able to follow blueberries with those other things is that the pH requirement for these plants is just like a rhododendron or an azalea, very, very acid loving. Cranberries, lingonberries, blueberries, rhodies, azaleas, they're all in the ericaceous family. Heaths, heathers, it's a fairly small family, but it's significant because in those acidic, naturally acidic soils, this is what you're seeing like all over the place. And here's a good picture of a low bush blueberry planting in Maine. I mean, I shouldn't say planting because you don't have to plant these plants. You can cut down the forest and they will spring out of the ground because it's a very acidic soil and they are native to that area. But we are going to be talking primarily because you don't do a ton of different, you don't really prune, you kind of mow off some of the old growth of a low bush blueberry, but you don't prune it selectively like we prune high bush blueberry. So we're talking about northern high bush. There are southern high bush as well, but primarily those varieties are probably good. Maybe the hardiest ones would be about the zone 5, but they're the mid-Atlantic varieties. And then north of New Jersey, it's all northern high bush. These plants are self-fruitful, so you can do a self-pollination, but they'll have much larger fruit and just be more productive if you cross-pollinate them. So again, 2 different varieties is helpful. Often these are purchased from nurseries, either bare root or in a pot. And at this point, this plant is 2 to 3 years old. As soon as we stick it in the ground, we call it a 1-year-old plant, but it really is a 2 to 3-year-old plant, small root ball. Interestingly enough, blueberries don't have root hairs. They have, you know, a decent netted root system, but they don't have root hairs. So it does impact somewhat their ability to grab nutrients and water. They want to be planted on, could be as little as 3 feet between plants in a row. Probably 10 feet would fit most of your rowers and leave plenty of space, but 4 feet is a good kind of basic amount of space in between the plant. So you plant them the first year or 2. After you plant them, you're going to remove those blossoms so that you can help that plant put more energy into establishing a root system. Do not hedge a blueberry or a raspberry for that matter. Do not hedge it because most of the fruit buds are at the terminal end of the cane. So if you just try to size control it by chopping off all the stuff you can't really reach, you're going to be in trouble. You want to start with removing diseased, broken, or dead branches, and then keep in your mind that a well-balanced plant will have up to 8 years old. So that's the other thing. All those old canes, really not very fruitful. The plant starts to plateau out when the wood starts to reach about 8 years. So you want 2 canes that are 1-year-old, 2 canes that are 2-year-old, 2 canes that are 3-year-old, etc., up to 8-year-old canes. And then you're just gonna, this time of year, every dormant or late dormant season, you're gonna pull out from the base, you're gonna take out those canes. If they're greater than 1 inch in diameter, that's what you want to take out. It's crazy, right? I shouldn't say a diameter. Yes, diameter. That's circumference, diameter. Neglected bushes, you can remove up to 20 to 30%. In fact, you can probably cut them all off, but I'll show you a picture. So if you don't prune, this is what you have. You have all this unproductive wood. And we're taking this wood off right down at the cane. You're literally sticking your pruners down into the ground because the crown of the plant is where those adventitious buds, and that's the word I've been trying not to use too much because I don't want you to get free. That's the bud tissue that's laid down in the fall of the year that is going to spring up with a new cane. That happens. Adventitious buds are things that you cannot see, but they're set the season before. So you have to get this out of here in order to allow that bud to break. Just like when you're taking a heading back or thinning back cut, you're trying to get a little bit more bud break, and the buds for new canes are coming from the crown. So if you don't prune, this is what you're looking at. If you prune too much all at once, so like you do what I said, you get this. So maybe you came in and did one heavy pruning and then didn't come back. You get a ton of new growth, or maybe they even just came along with a mower, a big bush hog, and took them all down, which you can do, but you have to get back in there and do some selective pruning so you can thin it out, because otherwise all that wood will be about the same age, and we don't want that. Oops, sorry, went backwards. This is what we want. We want a bunch of, these are beautiful new shoots straight up. I'd like to see that new wood come out of the ground and go, it's about the size of a Sharpie again, get up to about 3 feet in height before it branches. It's not coming out of the side of these existing branches. You've got older wood, but this right here is about as old as you want, and that's going to get taken out next season. Okay, so this is what a beautifully managed blueberry plant looks like. When it's in the dormant season, it looks like there's no wood at all there. Okay, so here's a good example. This is maybe I don't know, maybe an 8 or 10-year-old plant. So pruning all the dead, diseased horizontals, too low. Get this out of here. This is gone. The big ones are gone. Anything that's got this low branching, get it out. And then you're going to come back and this looks terrific. It's not 16 canes. I'll give you that. It's a little bit more aggressive than that, but it's still going to be great. You're going to have really good production and not so much to manage every single season. And this has to be done every single year, this time of year. Okay, that's how you do multi-stem shrubs, even for ribes and gooseberries. Let me go back and check the chat. Does anybody, I'm actually going to take a tiny break and look at you and see if anybody has any questions.
I don't, well, sort of. I'm going to bring up the protecting these, when you go back to the trees and you get them all set up when they're young saplings and so forth. What you didn't have around the trees was protection, because you know what happens with deer and so forth.
Oh, yes.
So I don't know if you're going, if you have a few photos of that, or at least mention that part That's the only part I was thinking of.
Yeah, I don't have any photos. I took a lot of that. I kind of put that in the pest management situation, but yes,
Well-
from a training and protecting standpoint, you should have some hardware cloth up, especially to protect. I mean, I'd put it up 2 feet at least, because bunnies or voles, well, voles are going to be down there and we could talk about that, but bunnies especially are going to girdle your plants. They're just love apples. They love apples. So hardware cloth, don't wrap it right close. Well, that will help. I like hardware cloth actually better than that plastic wrap that comes like that, because a lot of people forget about the plastic wrap. And sometimes if they don't have the expanding kind, you'll actually girdle your tree with that. So I'm a hardware cloth believer. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, David. All right, let's get back. I hope you're hanging in there. I know it's hard to listen to a Zoom for a long time, but okay. So currants and gooseberries are in that ribes category. And if you're not growing these, I would really encourage you to do it. They are awesome plants and they're awesome fruit. And we can grow them now because even though they are the black currants, only the black currants are the alternate host for this white pine blister rust, which is a very damaging disease to the forestry, the white pines in our forests. It's really only some susceptible black currants. And most of us, except if you're in the Catskill Mountains and the Adirondacks, most everywhere else can just grow them. If you're in the actual legal part of the Adirondacks, you have to register with the DEC that you're going to grow some of these plants just so that they know. But if you just try to avoid susceptible black currants, you'll be fine. And choosing resistant or immune black currants will help. These are some varieties. These are really good, great, high antioxidants, very flavorful, delicious fruit. And then there's some great currants that they're just beautiful plants. I'll tell you, red currants, I'll give you that they're extremely sour. They're not exactly things that most people would eat right out of hand, but the pink and the champagne varieties and black, of course, they're quite delicious. I think they're really, really lovely and they're just beautiful. And then I think, of course, gooseberries are also very underrated. The challenge with most gooseberry varieties is that they have very significant thorns. So they're not quite as much fun to go in there pruning. So you might have to get your rose pruning gloves up, dig into that. But it's essentially the same kind of pruning strategy as with blueberries, a multi-stem shrub. And it's even like pruning a forsythia or any of those ornamental multi-stem shrubs, thinning out first, getting rid of old wood, keeping the wood that's going to have the most floral display or the most floral that will turn into fruit production. Now, the difference with these different plants, fruiting plants anyway, is that the time that it takes for that cane to become somewhat unproductive. And in currants and gooseberries, it's a little bit quicker. It's the 4 or 5-year-old canes that they really start to plateau. So those are the canes that you want to take out. So you're leaving a few extra canes of each age, 3 to 4 1-year-old, 3 to 4 2-year-old, 3 to 4 4-year-old. And then you still get the same density of canes, 16 or so canes, but you're only leaving them there for 4 years. You're not having them reach that 8-year-old age. So remembering again, oldest shoots go, 3 to 4 shoots of each age class, remove the diseased and broken shoots first, and anything that's fruiting and branching too low, and then you're golden. It's not so hard, right? So elderberries, I saw a couple people did grow elderberries. These do have to be pruned quite aggressively. They're very vigorous plants. These plants will grow on 1-year-old wood. Most of the fruit will be on 1-year-old wood, but they do it's kind of like the blackberry where you prune it back to a skeleton. And then that new wood that comes off of the skeleton will have fruit still. So you want enough branching opportunity, but you don't want the canes down below to be too crowded. And then if you're growing black, I hope I left the picture of all the elderberries. Hold on. No, oh shoot. So these are some of the elderberry cultivars. commercial fruit cultivars. Oh, this is the one I left. I just love these plants. I love these plants. Sambucus is a fabulous plant. Lots of variation ornamentally. They have great, you can eat the blossom, you can save the juice for all kinds of use. You can eat the fruit. Don't eat the fruit raw. It's not so good raw. You really have to process this fruit. Some people have a little bit of a sensitivity to it, and it can cause some severe reactions to raw elderberry fruit. So just be aware of that. So it's just, I don't have a lot of good pruning pictures, but you're taking that wood, and it's quite weak wooded. So you don't want to have old wood because that often has borers in it. So a couple years old, and then you're getting rid of that old wood. Okay, really renovating it like that. Not very picky about the type of soil it has. It does need a lot of room, 6 to 10 feet. You're going to mow the alleys, obviously. Okay. Any quick questions on ribes or, okay, Layla, the pruning blueberry or the fertilizing blueberries. Blueberries do not like nitrate fertilizers. So anything that has ammonium sulfate, urea, manures, all of that is a great way to, those are good, composts are good sources of nutrients, and they're not heavy feeders, but they do need to have nitrogen every year. The one thing about blueberries, stop feeding by the 4th of July. Ideally, you want to start in put something down either in early May, and just by the 4th of July, you want to slow that growth down, because that's where we get into troubles. We had a lot of late, not hardened off growth that gets winter injury with blueberries. Okay. Hardy kiwi, another fabulous plant. I know that in some areas, maybe in the southern tier, definitely in the lower Hudson Valley, they consider this plant to be invasive. We have not categorized this because most of the time when we get into situations where we see this as being aggressive, the kiwi is not really at fault. It doesn't have a fruit the seeds are not moved around by birds so much, but the vine itself is aggressive. So if it gets shocked like by some type of like a fire, it can get really out of control. So you do have to be a little bit careful. Extremely heavy wooded. It needs to be really well trellised. Much heavier trellis, is more durable trellis than a grapevine. And it has to be summer pruned several times a year. So you prune it in the dormant season, then you go back and you thin it out in like July, and then again in August, and then your fruit comes in September. Great plant though. I'm not going to talk about too much of that. Just trying to introduce a few other plants that you could probably grow. This is a picture of a kiwi vine gone crazy. And these are hardy kiwis. So the fruit is smaller. It's a little bit it's not hairy. It's smooth, excuse me. It's about the size of a very, very large walnut, maybe of a really small egg, chicken egg. But this is what happened at an old resort that had a big alley, like a very, very long alley of kiwi over a trellis, and then it burned, and then it just went berserko, and that is something we want to avoid happening. So there's all kinds of other fruit that we can talk about. If you have questions, let's just go back to the chat.
So Phil has a question about elderberries.
Elderberries can take any kind, like a balanced 10-10-10, I would say. And elderberries are a relatively heavy feeder, but you don't want to go too crazy because they are also an aggressive grower, and you want to have a good balance between shoot growth and fruit growth. So just be aware that that's important. Did I help, or did I make it more confusing? Now's your chance to ask me questions.
Yeah, well.
Let me see. Let me pull up one thing. I think that a lot of homeowners can get a lot out of this one website. And I'm going to share it with you. quickly before we jump off. Okay, this was actually built for commercial fruit growers. However, many really good gardeners find this to be very, very helpful. And it is the website name is, oh shoot, that's blocking it. What is it? It's fruit.cornell.edu. Pretty easy. And so there are pages for tree fruit, grapes, and berries. And the tree fruit, if you click on that, you'll get all kinds of information. And I would say that this tends to be more commercial, but there's a lot of other interesting apple IPM for beginners that could be very helpful to you. That's about pest management. Maybe you're kind of thinking about hard cider, growing some hard cider varieties. So there's a lot of information there. So that can be helpful. And then there's some grapes, also very focused on the commercial grower, but super interesting if you're into that. But there's, lots of announcements for educational opportunities. The Northern Grapes Project for some of you might be very fun because it talks about things that we can grow in our region, and it has a scale appropriate for some of our smaller beginning grape growers. But berries is what I know best of all. So there's a lot of great stuff here. The one thing, there's two things. First of all, this berry diagnostic tool. From a pest management perspective, this thing really rocks. It's like a dichotomous key. It talks mostly about strawberries, blueberries, and raspberries, but you can choose what's your issue. Like say your plants are wilting and collapsing in a young planting, you can click that. And then you can go down, the outer leaves die first, the individual plants suddenly collapse, new plants exhibit poor and uneven growth, crowns are brown on the interior. So you can kind of pick through here and try to figure out, could be cooler injury from the nursery. Oh my goodness, that's one reason it could be dying. So then it gives you a good picture of what it looks like. And then the last thing I wanted to show you, other than the plant diagnostic thing, is, are we still seeing what I'm seeing? So now we're back to the featured resources page. I guess so, nobody's saying. So here's the nursery guide for berry and small fruit crops. This is awesome. So you can click on any one of these many different things. Let's say we want to plant cranberries. If you have your soil pH down to 4.5, I'd say go for it. You can look at all these different cranberry varieties right here on the left-hand column in the black. And then you can say, oh, I want to grow Pilgrim, and I want to buy them from DeGrandchamp Nurseries in Michigan. So here's the address, the informational email, their phone numbers, but there's also a live link to their website where you can go and you can say, I want to shop for that Pilgrim variety. Where are they? Oh, they have all kinds of things. Select to shop our nursery. Blueberry pants for the home gardener. Okay, let's see if they're going to take us there. Home gardeners packages. Well, I think you can actually go to the things, but I won't take too much more of your time. But and we have not curated. We try to do our best about having every nursery ever known to man put on this website. But there have been a few that we've had recurring problems with. So you can know that if there's a really bad apple, we have taken them off of that nursery list. But I'm not going to tell you who they are. Can you recommend resources buying fruit trees, particularly apples? There are some great nurseries out there. One of them is Miller's, and Miller's still is selling apples. But there's also Stark Brothers does sell apples. you can go to some of our. There was a St. Lawrence nursery is way up in the Adirondacks in St. Lawrence County that I think is still open. Fedco does a good job. They sell some plants. So that is a good source. I would just be a little bit careful of buying plants from box stores, you know, oftentimes they can be just fine, but oftentimes they're also like they're the end of the line for these things. And it's just, their quality isn't as good. I would really strongly encourage you to buy direct from a nursery, buy bare root. It's a cheaper way to go, and it provides you more opportunity for success. Do I have any other questions?
You want me to put in something?
Susan, did you have a question?
I don't. I was applauding the fact that you've done so well that there are no questions. You see, that's what happens.
I've overwhelmed them. That's always I just throw it all out there and see what happens. And everybody's like, well, I can't stand any more information. Yeah, I'm sorry about that, but
No, right. But I was
yeah.
thinking now, this, you know, well, thinking of the future, and it may not include me, but the thing is, this type of class actually is, you can't do this in person. You could, but by the time, you know, it's usually cold. And we're in a, you know, we're not in a setting where you can go into the detail you went here and then go outside. So that's maybe something to think about in the future.
Yeah, you know, ideally, I think it's kind of a classroom lecture to understand kind of the rationale behind what you're doing, and then going out and looking at it, perhaps after the participants have actually tried it on their own plants.
Yeah, well, that's true.
That is helpful to go out like this afternoon, if you can bear it, or tomorrow, and try to prune something, because the timing is perfect for doing some pruning. So you just really have to remember, pruning is an art. It's an art and a science. That's horticulture in general. There's this aspect of art and trying it over and over again and trying to perfect it. That is really, I think that's the beauty of it, right? That's why we love it. And then there's the science to kind of back up things for why something is working, why it's not working. I will give you access to the slides. I'll send the PowerPoint to David. I'll send the link to the recording. We'll put it up on YouTube, David, for you. And then you guys can link to YouTube and send the link out.
That's good.
And yeah.
So,
all right.
Send it to,
There's,
okay, that's
there's
good.
some 7. Okay.
Okay.
No questions. Well, thank you so much for all those nice comments. And I really hope you have a nice, cozy, maybe this will be our last weekend where we're stuck inside. Who knows? That would be fun.
But thank you very much. I think this worked out in this case. Well, as usual, though, with you and your team, it works out very well. So we thank you very much, Laura.
All right, David. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody. Have a great
have a nice
day.
drive home. We hope you enjoy the drive home.
Nice. That's great. Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care and thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.